rainfall event can actually trigger a large flood event, okay? So in other words, if our streams are already full, our ground is already saturated, and we get a, say for example, a 10-year stormwater event, a 10-year rainfall, that can actually cause a 50-year flood event, okay? Well, conversely, if we get a 50-year rainfall, but we're in kind of a drought condition, that can function kind of like a 10-year event. So it's not as black and white as this many inches of rain is this type of event, okay? And it also depends on the intensity of the rainfall, meaning how much rainfall over a certain duration. So in other words, in the Des Moines Metro on June 30th, we got ranges of anywhere from 3 to well over 8 inches of rain, okay, in a matter of less than a few hours, okay? So 6 to 7 inches of rainfall, we're considering that to be close to what is considered the 2% annual exceedance event, 0.2% annual exceedance event, otherwise known as the 500-year flood, okay? And we typically don't even call, the common terms are 10-year event, 100-year event, that's kind of what people are mostly used to. We typically use the recurrence chance. So in other words, a 10-year event has a 10% chance of occurring on any given year, okay? And I know that the question that comes to mind is, well, it seems like we've had a lot of 100-year events lately, okay? Well, it's all based on historical rainfall data. So in other words, if we take 1,000 years of rainfall data, and so in essence, you would expect to see, 10 floods equaling or being greater than the 100-year event over that time frame, okay? Well, it's not like those flood events would occur exactly every 100 years, okay? You would expect that we would see, oftentimes we might go 150 years without experiencing any 100-year or greater event, but we might have scenarios where we have, within 15 years, we could have 2 of them. So it doesn't mean that a rainfall event is going to occur every 100 years. It's a probability. And those probabilities are determined by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They provide historical rainfall data, and that's the data that we use to come up with these events, which kind of set our design standards. And typically the 100-year flood is used kind of as our long-term interval, because that's typically the largest event that is typically estimated with the historical rainfall data, and it becomes impractical to even design above that. And so I'm telling you all this because I want to set an expectation that no one, no engineer, not me, is going to say there's a never, okay? And so that there isn't, it's not practical to say that we can design something so that it will never flood. And so that's kind of what I want to set with the expectations here. When we design new systems, okay, if we have a green field, let's say, right, we got an open blank sheet of paper. What we typically do in new developments is the storm sewers are designed typically to handle anywhere between the 5-year and the 10-year storm event. Okay, that's how they're sized. And then what we do is we provide a 100-year or greater, 100-year overland flow route. Okay, so if the storm sewers exceed their capacity, there's somewhere for the water to go. Okay, and you'll see that, and hopefully, and the new, especially a lot of the newer, more recent developments and subdivisions that you see, that you'll see kind of greenways and spaces for where the water goes. In established neighborhoods, that wasn't always the design standard, okay? And so unfortunately, in established neighborhoods, that wasn't always the design standard, and so we don't have the 100-year overland flow route, okay? So maybe many years ago, and just to give you an example, what we're facing a lot throughout the city, if we pull up the 1940s aerials, and you look at them, and in some areas, and there's a drainage way, a ditch through essentially a farm field. Well, unfortunately, in the 50s and 60s, and there wasn't the design standards in place, and so there would be a development or subdivision that would come in, and they would enclose the ditch in a storm sewer, and then route the storm sewer through the subdivision, and then discharge it back into the drainage way or ditch again. Now, again, the storm sewer could have very well been designed to accommodate the rainfall at that time, but there wasn't the overland flow routes. So the reason I say this is we don't have the luxury of providing the overland flow routes. That is the challenge we face when we design in existing neighborhoods. Okay. So in terms of what we do is we typically, if we're going to do a new project in an established neighborhood, we try and design to prevent the 100-year inundation into structures. So in other words, if a 100-year event occurs, we model it and do basically inundation mapping to model where the water goes and try and prevent structures from being inundated, okay? And what I'm saying that is that design standard, that allows ponding and water on the streets, okay? And our design standards allow some cases, up to 6 inches above the crown of the street. And so again, I say this, I'm trying to explain the design standards that even with the current design standards, which are common, I moved here 3 years ago from Chicagoland, very similar standards used in Wisconsin, that is the case, that it's unreasonable to design so that the sewers capture all the water. So that's kind of just to kind of go through what do we do when we design a project? What are our standards? So now, in terms of what we're looking at right now in terms of a city capital improvement program, okay? $80 million was spent in the past 10 years on stormwater, okay? Looking at our CIP. What the current plan that was already that we've been working on for the past year proposes $120 million in the next 5 years, okay? So that's tripling the amount of stormwater work that's being done if you look at it in terms of a rate. So that's what's on the table now. What is being put in front of our council on Monday, on the 20th, is a consideration that would increase our stormwater utility rates that would allow an additional $25 million to be put in the CIP. So in other words, the 120 becomes 145. What the plan includes for that 145 million, the additional 25 million proposed is an additional 15 million into this Closest Creek watershed improvement plan, and then an additional 10 million into localized sub-watersheds throughout the city. So we consider the Closest Creek kind of like a major watershed, and so we already have, we've done, there's been studies done, there's a plan in place, and it's already been worked through, and I'll go through that here in just a second. But there's also little small watersheds that had flooding issues as well. And one thing to keep in mind, not only did we get hit on June 30th, on Monday, June 25th, we also got a rainfall event that caused a lot of tragic damage on the south side of Des Moines. So even that event, we've been dealing with. So it's all over the city. Even in my neighborhood, people were flooded, and so unfortunately, events like that certainly create a lot of damage.
Where are you?
In terms of, we talked about again, the proposal is to put an additional 15 million into the Closest Creek watershed. So where are we in terms of our watershed? When we talk about the Closest Creek watershed, we're talking about roughly almost 1,800 acres of water that all drains to a certain point, okay? And that eventual end point is the Des Moines River. And then, so we have so that's kind of what's considered our watershed. We have a plan. We've essentially already completed, if you look on the map here, the red and the orange, I apologize if it's hard to see, which is everything east of 30th Street. So you may remember last year we just finished the replacement of that culvert under 30th Street at Jefferson Avenue. So that was a project that was part of this plan. So we as a city have been working our way from the downstream up. Okay, and that's what we've got to do, right? It does us no good if we upsize. It typically doesn't do us a lot of good if we upsize a large pipe here if we can't get it out downstream. Okay, so we've been working our way up the stream already. So we're already through number 8, essentially right here, which is at 30th Street. The proposed plan, originally in the CIP, I mentioned an additional 15 million. What was in the CIP was about 8 million, okay? So the 15 million would bring us up to roughly 23 million. We already were working on the designs of a replacement of the storm box along the Kokota. So that's essentially from up to about just past 41st Street up near Leonard Place. Okay, so that was already in the CIP. That's already we've been working on that design this year, and you'll see that under construction sometime next year. Okay, should the action be taken on Monday night to increase stormwater rates, that would essentially get us up to through the light blue. Okay, which would get us up to about the 47th and Holcomb area, 47th and 47th and Holcomb area. So that's the proposal that's on the table. And again, feel free to, obviously we'll leave this up, for folks to come look at. So that's what's put on the table and what council will be looking at and considering Monday night should they increase the stormwater rates. Some of the other initiatives, I think, they talked about the loan program already. The council already passed on July 23rd. Most areas, such as this area, the storm sewers and sanitary sewers are separate sewer pipes, but our sanitary sewer pipes aren't perfectly watertight. They are not anywhere. They're not where I worked before. They're not, so they get infiltration. Water seeps through the manholes, water seeps through the pipes. There's connections from downspouts that go into the sanitary sewer. So in other words, flooding, major rainfall events can often cause the sanitary sewer to even back up and surcharge. And so what was put on the table was, originally the city had a program called the Private Protection Program that provided a 50% cost share for up to $1,000 to put in items such as a backflow prevention device. So in other words, it's a backflow preventer that prevents the sewage from coming back into your service pipe, into your house. And so now they've passed on July 23rd to make that 100% cost share up to $1,500. Okay, so a phenomenal deal, a great program that you can certainly talk to a number of plumbers about, and obviously look on our Public Works website for that program. Actually, Dan is one of the people who oversees that. So. Oh, you got applications even with you. So I think did I hit everything? So with that, I did that. Again, hopefully that kind of covers our design standards and what we're generally proposing for Closest Creek in the CIP. And so I think now it's time to open that up for questions for all of us. So.
Okay, so based on what you've heard or otherwise, does anyone have any questions